will you open us up in prayer?
Yeah. Lord, may our hearts be open before you. Lord, may we just settle our soul and mind so that we can hear you, Lord. Lord, we want to be your love and your light to each other. Lord, I pray that you would just bless each one who is seeking you or desiring you, Lord, and your life and just a relationship with you, Father. We want to honor you, and we want to honor each other and everything that we do. So we bless your name. Bless this time.
Amen.
It's around 1438, I think. How many of you wrote your poem based off of one of these recent poems? Did some of you know? Yeah, you did. Yes, you did. You did. Which ones?
I did 1436.
Okay.
1438. The one where
Oh, you did on the one we're about to
Yes.
read. Okay.
Loosely inspired, I will say. It's of the same heart, but it is not about.
Sure, yeah. Well, I guess if you guys don't mind, just sharing, like starting with Vince, this is an early one. If there's anything that you were, like, you don't have to read your poem, I'm sure that would be helpful, but like anything that you, like any further insight that you have based off of your deeper thinking on the subject. Again, it's not as much the
Which one did you use?
Analects itself, but
1436. So the one that we read last time, I think. Yeah, I mean, I really saw the main virtue in it as rest, pretty much. You know, being at peace with fate and knowing how to, I guess, compose yourself and you know what fate is. All those topics were kind of things that I've been thinking about, and I guess it just kind of clicked last time that we were reading. I was like, oh wait, this is kind of very similar to what I've been thinking about in rest and that posture of, you know, there was one line that I highlighted that stood out to me. The gentleman, by means of rightness, makes his peace with fate, and therefore his heart is always calm. And that's kind of the sentence that brought it to me as rest. And so I wrote about rest, pretty much, inspired by that posture of heart. I don't know if I have too much more
interesting. Yeah.
until you read it. The poem.
Reminds me of a passage in the Great Learning you've been reading. It's like the second paragraph, set of clauses or whatever. And the translation we read says something like, the point where to rest being determined, then you're able to have the big word they use was an unperturbed heart.
Mm-hmm.
I've seen that word used other places too, just a heart that isn't and really can't be disturbed or set off course.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it, is being set on course, you know, at rest with where your inner man is in the journey, the spiritual walking is.
And I think that what really defines an unperturbed heart, as it's even described here and in the Great Letter and in other places, is a heart that can't be disturbed. It's a heart that is actually on a course rather than, searching for one or tentatively on one. But a heart that is truly set on what is right and what is good is the very heart that can't actually be disturbed by anything.
It doesn't mean like they don't go through trial, obviously, and things affect
No, of
them
course
in
not.
life, but it's a different plane of.
They never leave.
rest.
Yeah, they can stumble, but they never fall. People use
Yeah.
New Testament language. Jaden, did you want to share a little bit before we actually read this Analects? Just
Mine is actually very similarly to Benji's. I suppose mine might be a combination of 36 and 38.
okay.
I think that there's something very tender about the heart posture that Confucius has. I kind of shared it last week even as like some extrapolation I was having, but I think where I really landed is that intent is far more powerful than effect in this when it comes to things like this. I think that's where I really drove from Confucius knowing that what he did was impossible and yet persisting. There's something that is important about intent, and that it is, we've had some discussions at our young brothers meeting about thinking about things. Our brains like to view things as cause and effect. That really isn't super helpful with a lot of more spiritual areas in life. And so I don't know if I have necessarily like a solid statement that I can give other than I have been really having a change of heart recently with how important intent is. Intent is a funny word because I think it's overly familiar to us. Maybe a better word would be where your source is and where your endpoint is. And it doesn't have to be set on something in specific, but more of in a direction.
That's what I really saw even in the father's house in the kitchen is the intent of the heart of the people who are working there.
Mm-hmm.
And that is what makes the difference between drawing your source and power from your effectiveness in doing good work and actually completing the goals, and the difference between doing his work in his presence with the intent of doing it with him. And I think that is a pretty big difference in how you go about actually getting that work done. Because the people that are tired are the ones that are,
Just on that effect.
yeah, there's still a dutifulness there, but there's a place that's too goal oriented. They're too focused on the end goal or what they're attaining unto instead of their intent and who they're doing it with. And that is, it's burning their wick.
Thank you so much for mentioning that, because you saying that is making me realize I think that's where my stirring started on this topic. And I think I forgot that's where it started, and I think this kind of like was the furthering of those thoughts. But 100% you are correct. Thank you for mentioning that.
Yeah.
That is 100% where that inspiration started for me. Because I felt very touched by that kitchen room, just because I felt like I understood it.
Mm-hmm.
And the Lord has certainly changed a lot in me in regards to that. I wouldn't necessarily describe myself as someone dutiful, but I definitely used to be someone overly goal-oriented, and I've changed so much since then.
Yeah, I think about that room in relation to rest too, and kind of what that looks like. Because obviously that's not a place of like an inactive kind of rest. It's a place where that work is being done. But there's a way to do it where you're you're at peace with it, or you're in a place of peace because you're doing it with it.
When you think about it in terms of like the effect and the cause, right? If the rest is not this external effect, right? It doesn't mean you're literally doing nothing. It's a rest in the heart, which is I think exactly what Benji's talking about.
Yeah, I tried to do my poem on the. I did on mine on the rest as well, but more of the rest that was portrayed in the Great Learning.
Okay.
And so it's more of actually a rest in the mind instead of a rest in the heart. Obviously, they're connected, but
What would you say the difference is?
I think a rest in the mind is a place that probably leads to rest in the heart. So I feel like that is what's going to just stir up a lot of that uneasiness. And I can't remember the exact. It's probably in the steps of attainment. I just can't remember the process in which it goes through. But I'm pretty sure, like, because what that rest is a calming of the mind, and that's where it starts. And then once your mind is in a place where it has good judgment and can make decisions, that's what it portrays. It's like now you can take the next step onto what was it, the observing of things or whatever it was called.
Nice.
And then that leads to attaining unto the highest knowledge or whatever it put, which then leads to the other stuff.
Yeah, I always remembered a conversation with Kim, I think, that I had about rest. It was a while ago. But the way that I forget where she looked it up, but somewhere in the Bible, I think, it kind of meant an intertwining with the Lord, true rest. And that's kind of the way that I've been trying to view it. It's like a coming into alignment with Him, like that's what true rest is being able to continually be more threaded in or something like that.
I think that's very much what the Father's house was saying with the kitchen.
Yeah.
Benji, do you want to read the first part, and then Kayla, you can read the next one.
Zulu spent the night at Stone Gate. The next morning, the gatekeeper asked him, "Where have you come from?" Zulu answered, "From the house of Confucius." Isn't he the one who knows that what he does is impossible, and yet persists anyway?
Most commentators believe the Stone Gate to be one of the outer gates of the capital of Lu, and explain that Zulu is returning from having traveled about with the master in search of employment. The Lu gatekeeper may be a principled recluse, or simply an ordinary functionary, but in any case, he shares his view of the, how would I pronounce that?
Wishing Mao.
Wishing Mao in 1432, and the recluse in 1439, that confronted wherever he goes by the indifference or actively immoral rules, Confucius should simply give up.
I feel like we've discussed this topic pretty well at this point, but unless you guys have any further thoughts on this particular example.
I do, but it bleeds into my poem a lot because it's a very personal application I've found with this one that really touched me, but I don't know how much you want to go into that now, maybe later.
I still think it's interesting the kind of currents of thought that Confucius would come against, like in this example, and then in other sided examples where you have people that have kind of faced the same reality of things seeming impossible to change. Again, we don't really know anything about this gatekeeper in particular, but he's likely to represent a group of people during that time who were also very aware of the corruption of the rulership in various states at that point. But their reaction was to become recluses, which is interesting how that ties into the previous Analects, 1437. And that kind of manifested itself in a variety of ways. The primitivists, which we were talking about before, were people that kind of just completely detached themselves from the society and lived in a very primitive way. So I think it's super simple lifestyle. And what that obviously did, especially since it's remembered even to this day, is it kind of made a bit of a political statement, even if it seemed to have been really detached from everything. It was still kind of communicating something. So its non-conformist approach was itself kind of a political statement. And a lot of scholars have tied that into the development of what became the Taoist school, even though it wasn't considered a school at the time. I don't know how much of that is actually accurate. Or the reason I say that is because Lao Tzu, who some people say doesn't even exist, or didn't even exist, he did a very similar thing, presumably living around Confucius' time. He saw everything that was taking place, and the legend says that he basically made his way out of China riding on an ox. And there was actually a gatekeeper that stopped him saying, I'm not going to let you leave. I'm not going to let you leave the country until you have shared some of your wisdom. So that's apparently how the Tao Te Ching was written. So yeah, we see people that have observed the same thing as Confucius and find the same things distasteful, generally speaking, as far as politics and ruling order of the time goes. But they had a very different reaction. Here they are reacting towards Confucius's very different approach, which was to keep trying, basically. And I do wonder how the shining virtue, just to use the language here, of Confucius's insistence in his example still may have affected the minds and hearts of such people. I mean, it's clear enough that they continued in their opinion of him as a very foolish person. But obviously these examples still ended up as Analects, so they very much worked in Confucius's favor as far as showing the stubbornness, as Confucius describes his own quality as a virtue. Yeah.
I can say a lot of it is, to me, reminiscent of some of the messages of the Little Prince. I see very much the growing up and the reality of adulthood as a lot of the people that surround Confucius. I'm sure that the word naive probably fits very well into what they meant by foolishness with him. This overly hopeful dreamer. And I think that there's, I don't know, I'm very reminded of that book just with a lot of the characteristics that the Little Prince exhibited, both with his, you could call it stubbornness in a way, but also something that appears as aloofness, but actually it has a lot more wisdom behind it than just simply drifting.
Interesting guy. Let's see. Move on to the next one. Naomi, do you want to read the first part? And then I can read the second one.
39.
Yep.
The master was playing the stone chimes in a state of work. A man with a wicker basket strapped it to his back passed by the door of the common family residence and remarked, "Whoever is playing the chimes like that certainly has something on his mind." After listening for a moment, he added, how despicable is this petty stubbornness? If no one understands you, just tend to yourself. If the river ford is deep, use the stepping stones. If it is shallow, simply raise your hand. The master, hearing the comment, responded, "Such resoluteness, who could take issue with that?"
I don't know this one.
Related to the prior,
Mm-hmm.
and also to this one.
This event is possibly meant to have taken place during Confucius's sojourn in Wei after losing office in Lu. Confucius's critic is wearing a wicker basket strapped to his back, the sign of a farmer or manual laborer, and yet has an ear for classical music and can quote from the odes. This would indicate that he is no ordinary commoner, but rather a scholar who has gone into reclusion, whether for philosophical or political reasons. Like the figures in 1432 and 1438, he is annoyed at Confucius's persistence in the face of an indifferent world, and advises him to simply accord with circumstances, as he himself has presumably done. The final comment of Confucius can be variously rendered. The interpretation adopted in the translation takes it to be sarcastic. Recluses like this one are taking the easy way out, and their claim to merely be according with the times is mere rationalization. Alternately, Yue's understanding of guo, or resolute, as chun, really and sincerely, makes Confucius's response somewhat softer and more wistful, though still ultimately disapproving. Ah, truly, that would be an easy way to go. Just continuing with the same example.
I think with this, I remember I kind of based it off of this one too, where I went with my poem, but the source of his resoluteness, his stubbornness, is a faith. That's actually how it ties into 1436. Yeah. It's in Confucius's case, it's a faith in heaven, because he knows that he is doing what heaven has called him to do, in a sense. And I kind of see this Analects as him, and I can get this way too very much, where you persist in something despite knowing that it is illogical and that by every rational means it's something stupid to do. And yet you persist because you know it's what you ought to do. And I find that end comment, I like the softer interpretation, because to me it shows that in a rational way, Confucius agrees in a sense and cannot and does not try to dissuade their opinion of him. But he still knows in his heart that this is heaven's will and that he will not alter from that, because he knows that no matter what his rational mind says and no matter what the jeering of others may indicate, he will persist down the path because he has faith in heaven's mandate. Not even necessarily to bring about some effect, but he has faith that it is what he has been called to do. I think that's the thing with faith that can sometimes get tricky, is like you have faith, but then your faith seems to be to some sort of end. Oh, I have faith this will happen. I have faith that my actions will bring about this. That's what I love about the showing of Confucius's faith here, is because it's not faith in an end. He doesn't believe that his actions will bring about change. He just has faith that it is what heaven has mandated him to do. And that is what drives him forward. That, I would say, is ultimately the heart of my poem and what touched me so much with all of these. Faith that transcends rationalization and affect and exists as a posture of heart.
Yeah, there was something about this Analect that really, I think, is an insight into Confucius' kind of demeanor, personal demeanor. You know, he's someone who, I don't know, there's in historically, certain people are looked at as childlike and foolish, but it's the thing that defines theirs. So like with, I don't see Confucius in many occasions as someone who has got his head down and his eyebrows furrowed with intention and perseverance. I think he does things out of an overflow of what brings joy to him. And so even what is perceived as persistence, he doesn't even really feel it like that. He will concede to someone's description someone calling him stubborn, but it doesn't, it's like water on a duck's back. It just kind of flows off. It's like it doesn't matter. And so there's an old illustration of a child on the beach, and the tides came up and like brought up all these shellfish, clams or something like that. And so there were thousands and thousands of them on the beach, and they wouldn't, they were gonna die because they had been brought up far enough to where they couldn't get back out to the water. And so there was a little boy down on the sand, and he was picking up the shellfish or the clams, and he was throwing them back. He would throw them out like rocks, and he was just doing that one at a time. someone walked up on the levee behind him, looking down on the beach, and basically said, why are you doing that? You're never going to make any difference. Can't you see how many there are? And so, like, you're not making any difference. You're not helping, basically. And the little boy picked up another one and threw it in. And he said, well, it made a difference for that one. And so, and he just kept doing it. And so, like, if you think about the way that, I don't think that the child had a savior mentality. He just was taking joy in what he was doing. And so, Confucius was a very, in many ways, light-hearted character. He could be super serious and probably really sharp. But he also, here he is in this Analect, and he's playing music. And music is very meaningful, obviously, but it's also an expression. He was someone who acted or functioned like a gentleman, not because he was trying to be one, but because he really enjoyed those aspects, the good thing, those virtues of life. They were something that brought him fulfillment. And so I think that's where he had a lot of despondency with many disciples, and otherwise is all these Analects that are the conversations that were had in relationship to trying too hard or not trying hard enough, come from a place of where the what's going on inside of you, what's your real desire. And then of course those things connect to the what's the concept, native virtue, native whatever
Substance.
native substance. And it's something intrinsically, it's a posture of heart and a perspective from the inner man that takes hold of certain things in a certain way. And to that type of, to that setting in the inner man, like, nothing is out of reach. There's no feat that can't be accomplished. And the measurement of whether you did or not is not that you did accomplish it, but that you were always freely, without burden, moving toward those things. And that's not to say that there are no burdens in life. Confucius regularly shared the burden that he had, that basically others would see things in that way, as the way of righteousness or the way of peace in all things in life, and how productive and fruitful that can be when it's practiced by a people. And so even the last Analect, where it's talking about Zulu coming back from traveling with Confucius looking for employment, it's not the modern day picture of, somebody getting back, Isaac and I getting back after spending a day on the road and going to Lowe's and Home Depot and Costco and Walmart and Taco Bell and putting in job applications. Like, his employment was not, for someone like Confucius, correlated to, if I don't work, I don't eat. That's a basic principle of life, but it wasn't, I need to take care of myself and have some earnings to do that. It wasn't that kind of prospecting. He was looking for a place where it's kind of a shift on the word usage there. He was looking for I don't know what the terminology is for the ruling areas, a fief, a kingdom, some sort of town or country where the way could be employed. And so his interest in that was that he wanted to see that practiced. That was the nature of employment. It wasn't, I have a job and I have a position somewhere. It is, where will this practical way of life that produces something in the midst of the people, where will it be put into? Where will it be employed? Put to work. See what I'm saying? It's something that has to be put to work. And that's the nature of the kingdom. And that's why the apostles share things like that the kingdom of God is not food and drink, or it's not just noise and words. It's something, it's a governmental order that's employable, which means you can put it to work. And when you put it to work, it produces something. And it's for the joy of the process and the product that Confucius lived for. So you can have something that is beautifully engineered, like a vehicle that's used for some specific purpose, a race car, something that's built specifically for a track like the Nuremberg in Germany. And it can go through all the tests, and the engineers can, one auto manufacturer that did that that was BMW with the 5 Series, and they actually built what would you call that? A simulator that they would put their vehicle on, and it would stress the vehicle out. It could drive exactly like it was on the Nuremberg, but it was actually just in a shop being gauged by computers. And so they were testing all of their engineering based on this most difficult track in the world and one of the most dangerous tracks in the world. But the car had actually never been put on the track. It had never been employed, and so the joy of getting to not just finish the work of the car, have this thing that has this capability to actually be the one in the seat performing that capability, and having this machine that can just eat up that track like nothing else because it was designed for that work. That's the kind of sentiment of the way that someone like Confucius would see the employment of the way. This has a very practical effect when it's put to work in a people. So you can have a beautiful field that has the most fertile soil, but until you labor in it and plant the seed and nurture the plant, then you don't ever get to experience what can come from that employment, putting something to work. And that's kind of the broader scope behind some of these recluses who were wise men and scholars and whatever else, but they were really missing something. They were missing some joy for what it was. And so, Confucius in this last Analect is saying, it is difficult. But he's not but he's saying that after playing music that draws out the longing and meaning of this kind of life. That's the other part about, the essence of ancient, or, the ancient Eastern music and the practice of musical instrument and the practice of swordsmithing, or not swordsmithing, but, what do you call that? Sword fighting? Sword handling? And that connected to calligraphy and writing. It was that there were so many ways for this governance of life to be expressed in a person, so that it couldn't be missed, not only by the person, but by everyone around them. That the guy walking by in the basket didn't miss it. He could not pass that by. His conscience, something was unsettled in his conscience about it. He took it out. His rebuke to Confucius is a disapproval of himself, because he doesn't have the light heartedness in carrying the burden. So Confucius recognizes it a burden, but he doesn't continue it with a woe is me. He continues it as an outflow of this inner life that he carries and the joy of that expression. He can do it alone. He can do it with others. He longs to see it put to work, but it's like this flow within never stops. That flow of life has no cessation in him. You know, and it's not that obviously that any person is not going to face difficulties and highs and lows, but what's in them never ceases to like give strength and resolve. But our idea of resolve is forceful and not like naturally produced. I can't help it. I just, this is the way that my inner man is built. And so he sees that also, and he doesn't claim any level of completion or perfection in that, but he looks in so many of these writings, he's looking back at some of these kings or rulers of the past, these wise rulers, and he sees that same drive in them. But it's not a drive of force and manipulation. It's something that just emanated from them. They couldn't help but pursue the good and see the greater. And so that defined them more than anything they did. And so a lot of these critiques against Confucius are really a mirror of what is lacking by the one who is criticizing. They're seeing their own shortfall in the beauty of the expression of life in someone else. And those things, they get drawn out by that. But I really like that. I like the dichotomy that's there in that particular Analect because of the music, and then this other person, and then drawing out this again the theme of, well, this is impossible, and why do you do that? Why don't you give up? And all these things. And what I'm trying to get at is Confucius was a principled man, and he was someone who was guided by a principle, but I don't like that definition, because there was something more pure that was his motivator than simply principle. He wasn't pointing at rules and trying to be strong-handed or stiff-armed about certain things. They were the things that brought him peace and joy. And so it wasn't a struggle for him in the way that we would typically describe struggle. Because it would enable him, the same thing would enable him to go through hardship without too much trouble in his heart. No matter what his flesh was facing, or circumstance that was negative in front of him. And so to see something, you think about what happened before that. Where was Confucius before this? How did he come up to this place at this gate or wherever in front of someone's house and see these stone instruments? What's going on inside of his heart and mind as he is just walking and living his life, and he looks over and he sees this and he's drawn to it to express something. It's a very different perspective on what gives motivation and empowerment to his way of life, to the way that he thinks. So when you juxtapose that to the decisions and the various things that may have gone through the heart and the mind of this other man who was drawing the basket or whatever, and he's in this low state of frustration and in rejection of certain things in the world, and he's lost the one thing that matters, the first love. And maybe never had it, but definitely not holding on to it. So again, Confucius says, that would be an easy way to go, and also gives a nod to, the knowledge that this scholar carries and the frustration that he bears. He doesn't reject any of that, but it doesn't change his flow of life. It doesn't change what gives him vision, motivation, inspiration. And so he's unmoved by those things. He's unmoved that he's grieved at the same time. No one receives this. Only heaven understands me. Right? He's grieved, but he's unchanged. He struggles through it, but he still plays a song. It's impossible, but it's the right thing. And so that central thing for him, through those variations that would seem to have an effect, actually don't have an effect at all. Because the flow of life is so strong, it's uninterrupted by that. And I'd like to hear those instruments.
I had some similar thoughts before you had mentioned what you did as far as what seems to be like this disagreement between what Confucius is for and the way he expresses himself a lot, which is what it's for, obviously, we know, is to reinstitute the way of the ancient kings, as he would put it, but we know that there's probably a much fuller way to describe that. But then, as we see more often than we see an expression of joy in Confucius, so we see a what seems to be a dissatisfaction with himself and his efforts. But I think what that shows first is that Confucius is this will tie into how he actually is a truly joyful individual, and what would seem like a very like a counterintuitive way. But firstly, Confucius does much of what he does, it would seem to be in spite of himself, in spite of his feelings. And that's where I think many observe from an outsider point of view the petty stubbornness of Confucius. I see the playing of the instrument here as consistent with other ways he's expressed emotion, which is very much in a sorrowful way rather than a joyful way. But the way that ties into him as a truly joyful person is because I think that learning to move forward in what the heart has been given to dedicate itself for is the true source of his joy. And so these episodes of grief and exclamation that he experiences are kind of like bumps in the road, in a sense. Not the deepest expression of his heart's experience. Because I'm reminded of what's been considered the spiritual autobiography of Confucius, where he says throughout different stages or ages of his life, he came to certain points of enlightenment and revelation. The very last being, he was able to follow his heart's desire without stepping over the line. That wasn't until he was in his 70s or whatever it was. But I think it was leading up to that point of that latest stage of his life that his heart continued to struggle to balance itself or be in harmony with the rest of his experience as a person. And much of that experience was very disappointing. But the sort of joy he describes himself as having, and that he even, as we saw in other Analects, that he wanted his disciples to describe him as to other people that asked about him, was a joy that is something much deeper than transient emotion, right? It is a joy, if I could summarize it in this way, a joy of being consistent in what one has dedicated their lives to. And that consistency and your stubbornness in it is going to lead to adverse feelings and experiences, because there are so many things that try to take you off the path or distract you or waylay you or whatever it is. But I think that deepest sense of peace and satisfaction and true joy is Confucius's faithfulness to the way he was walking in, the way that he was trying to teach. And I think, as was already mentioned, he still struggled a lot with expectation. That's where his heart was being trained a lot, I think. Because when you expect something and that expectation isn't met, that's like one of the fundamental definitions of unhappiness is something you expected doesn't come to be, so you're dissatisfied. And even though his expectations were very lofty and virtuous ones, they still weren't met in the way that he expected. And that's kind of the default and the inevitable nature of the human heart anyways, is it anticipates things. And when those things don't come to be, even in the way that you hoped they would be, then it feels like it failed, or it feels like it was failed. And so the joy I'm really observing in Confucius here, the simplicity even of his character, and that joy is one that is it is much deeper than emotion, for sure. Because the emotion that we tend to see in Confucius is not the happiest. I'm not saying he wasn't happy personally at all, but I think the manifestation of that joy as an emotion, that's something that could be something that was tangibly observed in Confucius, was, I think, greatest in the later period of the later period of his life, which seemed like things kind of settled as far as even his understanding of what his life was mandated for. But obviously a man that lived a very difficult life, I think. But that's another cool thing that I think my dad hinted at, is he wasn't insincere about the emotion that he he did encounter, or the circumstances that he did encounter. So he wasn't like this, he wasn't like a stoic, kind of the description my dad gave at the very beginning of what he was saying. He wasn't like this stoic, detached person. He responded sincerely to everything that he did experience. So that very often was sorrowful and disappointing things. But I think for that very reason, he was able to express his joy in the same level of sincerity.
I think a funny little example, and it's done better in the book, obviously, but after Gandalf's death, and they arrive in Lothlorien or whatever, and Sam sings a song for Gandalf. It's a lament. And someone may come and say, well, that was a really beautiful song. And part of him would the expression that he had was mourning and sorrow and lament. But at the same time, it was his joy and privilege to offer such a thing. See what I'm saying? That's joy. I'm glad that I can do that and be that and express that. That gives me this fulfillment, and it's a part of it. It's an overflow. I can't help it. You know what I mean? So we don't necessarily, and that's why it's important to not necessarily always try to equate joy to happiness. Joy is an overflow from a deep place within. And it can be connected to many emotions.
Guess we'll probably wrap it up then. Isaac, can you pray for us?
Yes. Lord, I thank you for your continued work in the hearts of your people in this season. Lord, let it be our joy to labor with you and unto you and with each other, Lord. Lord, continue to show us how to work together, Lord, in this, and to bring about that employable way, Lord. Lord, I thank you for this time, Lord, and I continue to bless it, Lord, and to bring it before you.